Good morning, friends. Ann here. Got my cup of coffee, got the Word of God, and today's reading is from Hosea chapters 1 through 3. Hosea is one of the minor prophets in the Old Testament. We're going to be reading through the minor prophets in the upcoming weeks. Last week, we started with Amos, and we said that at the time Amos was written, that the nation was divided up into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom was Israel, and this was the kingdom that was rebelling against God, that was in all kinds of immorality. They were in idolatry. They had begun to adopt the pagan ways of the nations that were all around them. And the prophet Amos was from the lower region named Judah, and that is where we find Hosea in that same area and that same time frame. So this evil king Jeroboam II was on the throne, and he was ruling, and the nation of Israel, for all intents and purposes, seemed to be really, really prosperous, but they were really, really corrupt. And in the middle of their immorality and their corruption, Hosea comes, and God used Hosea's life to be a demonstration of Israel's idolatry. And so he tells Hosea in chapter 1, verse 2, when the Lord first began speaking to Israel through Hosea, he said to him, "Go and marry a prostitute, so that some of her children will be conceived in prostitution. This will illustrate how Israel has acted like a prostitute by turning against the Lord and worshiping other gods." So you may say, that sounds like a terrible idea. Why would God have this prophet of his go and marry a prostitute and then have children? And here's the thing that we need to understand is that this is not a statement or a story about Hosea and his wife Gomer, who ended up having these 3 children, and she went back into prostitution and she sold herself and all of this. This is a story of Hosea and Gomer that is being played out to illustrate Israel's own adultery, their own infidelity and unfaithfulness to God as they worship all of these idols and go through with all of these pagan practices, yet continue to be holy and go through the motions of religiosity as outlined in the first couple of books of the law. So friends, this is the stage that is being set where Hosea has this wife Gomer. There's a lot of infidelity in there. They have 3 children, and here is what happens in chapter 3, as you read through. It says this in verse 1. "Then the Lord said to me, Hosea, go and love your wife again, even though she commits adultery with another lover. This will illustrate that the Lord still loves Israel, even though the people have turned to other gods and love to worship them." So God was about to bring about judgment. He was about to bring about pain, but the purpose was not for punishment. The purpose was because of his love for this nation. And then he says this in verse 2. "So I bought her back for 15 pieces of silver and 5 bushels of barley and a measure of wine. Then I said to her, you must live in my house for many days and stop your prostitution. During this time, you will not even have sexual relationships with anyone, not even me." And then it says in verse 4, "This shows that Israel will go a long time without a king or a prince, and without sacrifices, sacred pillars, priests, or even idols. But afterward, the people will return and devote themselves to the Lord their God and to David's descendant, their king," who was Jesus. "In the last days, they will tremble in awe of the Lord and of his goodness." Friends, the whole part of this first part of the book of Hosea, it really talks to our lives. That not only was the nation of Israel unfaithful like Gomer, but we have been unfaithful like Gomer. And friend, the thing that this points to me is that unfaithfulness requires redemption, which leads to restoration. Friends, if you find yourself in the place of Gomer right now, where you are worshiping things instead of God, where your heart is far from him, I want you to know that your unfaithfulness requires redemption. Here we hear that Hosea bought Gomer back from her prostitution, her slavery to prostitution. Friends, Jesus paid the price for you and for I, so that we could be redeemed and ultimately be restored. Friends, unfaithfulness requires redemption, which leads to restoration. Have a good day.